How much you want to bet? Pick a cup.
That cup game at $10,000 bet increments was bullshit, and you fucking know it. You know it. I had absolutely no chance at guessing that. Maybe I could when I was younger. I don't think I could. Or maybe my eyes have just gotten worse with age. I don't know. But that cup game was bullshit at 10,000 bit increments. Oh my God. But now that I'm done talking about cups, just a quick reminder that this review will be full of spoilers. So if you don't want to be spoiled for this game, please turn back now. So I'm doing this one a bit sooner than I thought I would, just because I think 99% of the people that subscribed are Suikoden fans, so I think it's only appropriate that I maybe do a Suikoden video. And plus, the Suikoden Chronicle Kickstarter's over. So something to, tide everybody over in the meantime, right? But I love Suikoden, and there are so many things that make this game great. And there are many reasons why it is so fondly remembered and treasured by so many different people. It's the 108 recruitable characters. It's the fact you're allowed to have 6 members in your party. There's army battles, duels, and the big one for me and a lot of people is the world building that Suikoden does from game to game. And the fact that in every game we're very focused on one particular region of the world, and we're given an intimate look into that region and its politics and the relationships between all the different factions contained within this area. So there's a ton of reasons why people love Suikoden and why it's so endearing today, as evidenced by how well the Suikoden Chronicle Kickstarter did. But there's one thing that's not so great about Suikoden, especially the original one, and that was its cover art. For the Suikoden Chronicle Kickstarter, we got a special treat where we're gonna get a bad, Western art cover, essentially, a bit of a nod to this game here. I'll throw it up on the screen there for you all to look at. But I remember seeing this game for the first time. It was in Blockbuster Video. It was like a Friday, school's done for the week, cruising through the aisles looking for a game. And I see this cover art and I'm like, what the fuck is this all about? And then thank Christ I flipped it over to the back and looked, and you see the great sprite work going on. You can see immediately you can have 6 different members in your party, and I'm like, oh, I want to try this out. I'll take it home. And then that was the beginning of the addiction that is Suikoden. So Suikoden 1 uses sprite-based graphics, and god damn it, I miss this graphical art form very much. Because it just holds up incredibly well, no matter how many years go by or decades or whatever. Sprite-based graphics look amazing. And I mean, obviously there's a bit of nostalgia there for me too, because it obviously harkens back to a time when I was much younger, much less responsibility. And it was a happy time in my life, right? When I got to play all these different types of games. And so, I mean, that combined with the fact that they just, honest to God, look good, and the developers of Suikoden Chronicle picked sprite-based work for a very good reason. Obviously, probably to harken back, to the PS1 era and to, fulfill that nostalgia. But it just looks awesome. Look at Octopath Traveler, and then Suikoden Chronicle is just taking that art form and just fucking running with it. So no, sprite-based artwork. It looks fantastic. And, when they developed Suikoden back in the day, they're doing 108 different characters for you to recruit, a lot of them playable in battle. So, they have to, animate all that. And a lot of characters have their own specific unique runes in battle, and those have to be animated as well. So it was just an incredibly admirable feat that the developers did when it came to creating Suikoden. And the excellent graphical work is further reflected in the different locations in this game. They all have a slightly different ethnic flavor to them to a degree. And oftentimes this is reflected in the music in these locations too. So no, they were just firing on all cylinders when it came to the great sprite work in Suikoden. And with 108 different characters in the game, there's something here for everybody. You know, you have elves, ninjas, dragon knights, warriors, mages. You know, there's something here for everyone to like. You know, we're not in a typical RPG where we only have maybe half a dozen to 10 characters to pick from. No, there's something here for everybody to like. And since I'm, you know, a guy who's never satisfied apparently, there's one character in this game where I wish we could have recruited quite badly, but we never did. And that was the dwarf chieftain. Oh man, I remember seeing him for the first time and just thinking he looked like such a badass motherfucker, and he looked so evil too. Almost looked like he's like hung over and just really pissed off. But, and it very much happened to me going through this game again. I'm like, oh yeah, the dwarf chief. I wish we could have recruited him. But anyway, that aside, there's something in this game for everybody, and that's what makes Suikoden's formula work so well. And that's not to say that there aren't some throwaway characters in Suikoden, because there definitely are. You know, not every character is going to be made, you know, equal. You know, for example, there's like Windows that you can recruit in the Warriors Village. And then there's like Melody as well, who can change like the cursor sound and stuff. Like there's definitely some throwaway characters in this game, absolutely. But hey, if you really don't like one of them, you can always take them into the bathhouse and make sure you put like the little boy statue in the corner, and he'll get his head peed on. So there you go. But some throwaway characters aside, if you're anything like me, you're gonna have a hard time sometimes picking out which 6 characters to bring with you, because honestly, so many of them are just, you know, endearing, interesting, or just straight up fucking cool to look at, that it's gonna be a struggle. And that is a great problem for a game to have, that it has an overabundance of cool characters that you want to have with you at all times. And every time you would recruit someone, you know, you get that little joining tune that would pop up, and obviously your brain's, you know, releasing a little dopamine at the same time, because you're just like, oh yeah, I got one more recruit for my army. And eventually when you get the, you know, I believe it's the Tablet of Destiny, you know, where you can see, you know, all the 108 stars on it. You know, the first time you look at that bad boy and you realize just how many people are out there waiting for you to recruit them. Oh man, like hearing's one thing, but seeing's another, and it just dawns on you like, holy crap, like there is so much variety in this game in terms of characters. And many of the characters in this game have unite attacks, which are honestly just the sprinkles on top. They add a little bit more flavor to combat. Some of them are super viable, especially Tur and Kai's unite attack, which hits all enemies and honestly can be game breaking in the early parts of the game, because it will just wipe out most enemies you encounter in random encounters out in the field. And a lot of them, you know, are comical as well. Some of them aren't very good, but hey, it all adds to the flavor of the game. And a lot of the time it reflects, you know, the personality of the characters that you're using. And another thing that really expedites battles in Suikoden is the fact that you have the free will commands. And I always really liked using the free will commands, because it just gets you right in the go of the fight right away. And I just love seeing my party members dash into the enemy lines, and the enemy lines dashing into my parties, and just everyone kind of taking like hits at one another and just kind of jumping back and forth. It just, I don't know, it felt like an actual fight was happening. So no, I do like the free will system and just how characters kind of attack and take attacks in random encounters. The magic system for this game was the rune system, essentially. And, you know, it's an okay magic system. You know, I didn't find myself using it very much. I very much kind of tended to conserve all of, you know, the rune uses that, you know, your characters were allotted for boss fights, essentially. Because a lot of the boss fights, you know, they had a ton of HP, and rune magic is definitely the way to go to whittle them down appropriately. But at the same time, they did need a different type of magic system for this game, just because you did have 6 party members. So, you know, I think they obviously felt like they needed to, you know, greatly restrict the amount of magic characters could use, or it could be abused quite a bit. So, no, it might have some problems, but I think it does work well for this game. And another thing that makes Suikoden so fantastic that I haven't even touched upon yet is the fact you get to customize and build your own fortress in the game. You get to have a base where you get to, you know, keep all of your recruits at. You know, you can open shops within your base. There's mini games there. You know, you have a bathhouse, a storage unit, and it feels like home. your base in the Suikoden games. It really does, and it very much does in this game. You can go around and talk to everybody. You get to see, maybe who they hang out with, which part of the castle they get to hang out in. And no, it's just a great addition, and it's unique to this series. And it's one of my favorite aspects. I love just, upgrading my base and seeing how the layout changes. And, I like how in future Suikoden games, you get to just, have more and more elaborate home bases. And JRPGs definitely have a bit of a bad rap when it comes to one thing in particular, and that is grinding. But Suikoden doesn't have that problem. You don't need to grind in Suikoden to get your party members up to snuff. And that's great because you have 108 characters to recruit. So, you don't want to be, slogging through random encounters hour after hour just because you got a new recruit and you want to get them up to snuff with the rest of your party. So that's great, but there is one thing that does almost kind of make a grind necessary, especially if you want to trade in and out different party members and have them be viable in combat. And that is, you need money in this game. You need a stupid amount of money to sharpen weapons for your characters and to buy them equipment. That is, if you don't want to be constantly stripping characters of their old equipment and then putting on new characters you get, if you just want to have everyone kind of fully outfitted. But there is a way to get past that, and his name is Gaspar. And he has the dice mini game. I think it's pronounced Chinchiroren. I'm probably butchering the shit out of that pronunciation, but whatever. But anyway, so you can play the dice game against him and you can win quite a bit of money quite quickly. And it doesn't hurt either that he is often a terrible gambler and he can't seem to keep his dice in the goddamn bowl. You! But I am grateful to Gaspar for being a little bit shitty at dice, because it wasn't until much later in the game that you could farm a decent amount of money from random encounter battles. And there are two other battle modes that are synonymous with Suikoden. And one of them is the army battles that happen within the game. And they're very different from game to game within the franchise at large. And for the first game, it's very rudimentary. It's very much a rock, paper, scissors mechanic for the most part. So it's charge beats bow, bow beats magic, and magic beats charge. And, as rudimentary as it is at the time when first playing it, there was, nothing quite like it. It felt like you were actually leading an army at this point because, you could see how many troops you had in one corner versus the enemy in the other. And there was still fun to be had in it because you could do certain things like, your merchants could convince the enemy to, betray their army and join yours. Or you had, the Dragon Knights that could do an aerial attack. Or you even had, ninjas that could tell you what the enemy was planning next. And holy shit, if you had all three ninjas in the game, the Empire was so fucked because it would guarantee you had at least 3 turns of maximum damage against the enemy. And they just didn't have a hope in hell of beating you at that point. And there were consequences to the army battles as well. If you got your ass beat, by picking, the wrong option, whether you picked, archery against, a charge attack and so on and so forth. You could have members of your army be wounded or straight up killed. So there were definite consequences. And I've definitely reset the game once or twice because I've had someone been killed or wounded during an army encounter. But no, they're very rudimentary in this game, but I still found them quite enjoyable. And they definitely gave this game an elevated sense of scale. And then another battle mode synonymous with Suikoden is the duel system. And the duel system, once again, it's a rock, paper, scissors type mechanic. You have desperate attack, which beats attack, attack which beats defend, and defend which beats desperate attack. And you very much figured out how to attack a certain enemy by deciphering their dialogue. Based off what they're saying, you try and figure out what attack's going to work appropriately. And it definitely worked for the time. It was fun. And they were enjoyable to watch, and they were dramatic, and they often happened at significant story beats, and they, added an extra level of drama to what was going on. One in particular that's very iconic is the one with Tur fighting his father Tio, and him beating him. And, the words they share, Tio's parting words to his son. It is always a moment that gets me every time I watch it, and it very much did this time as well, playing through it again. And one little annoying thing about the original Suikoden that I always notice every time I play it is there is no dash, naturally, for your main character in this game. You're always walking. So I always found it a little bit annoying that I always had to have one rune slot filled with a holy rune, essentially, so I was able to dash with my characters. It's, I know you don't have to, give your characters a sprint rune or whatever. And I do like to take my time when playing video games, but I also like to feel like I'm moving. So, it was just one of those things where I was like, oh man, I always have to use up someone's rune slot with a holy rune because I actually want to be dashing around in this game, to speed things up a little bit when it comes to walking. So it's just one of those little complaints, and it is fixed for the future games. But it is something I always notice in this game when I start up and before I get the holy rune. And as I said at the beginning of this review, Suikoden is so beloved for the world it built. It greatly expanded upon the world we came to know with every subsequent game, obviously starting with the first, and how we got, an intimate understanding of any given area that we were placed in. And, this was the beginning of that epic journey, so Suikoden will always have a very special place within the series. And, we just meet so many different cool factions and characters, and oh man, I'll always remember seeing Futch for the first time. Just realizing this game has fucking dragon knights in it. Fuck, I thought that was badass. And I just knew this game was going to be right up my alley when that moment happened. And I've touched on a few things so far that Suikoden, hasn't done perfectly. It's not a perfect game, no game is. And another instance of this is its translation. It does have translation errors throughout it. Very indicative of the time when this game was released. There were a lot of games released around this era where there were translation issues prevalent. Anything from Suikoden series to, goddamn Final Fantasy, like whatever. But you know what? Replaying it again now, it never really detracted from my enjoyment of the game. Yes, I would notice funny spelling mistakes and whatever, but it didn't really jar me out of the game too much. So, it is something I am willing to forgive, and I think if people know that it's indicative of the time, it's something that's, quite easy to accept. But, it's just one thing I should point out. Translation isn't perfect, but fuck, it's still a classic game, and it still does an amazing job. And in terms of this game's narrative, as, uplifting and as positive as the game can be at some points, you very much feel like you're beating the odds at this game a lot of the time. It has some gut-punching moments in it, man. There's a ton of death and despair in this game. I had forgotten, we have Odessa's death, we have Ted's, we have Gremio's, we have Tio's, we have Matthew's at the very end. There are characters dropping like goddamn flies in this game, and some of them go out in particularly tragic ways. And that just, is reflected in the game's narrative with, Tur getting the Soul Eater rune and just how much suffering it truly causes its bearer. It's quite the thing to witness in the game, playing it, all these years later, and maybe having a bit more of a, a nuanced understanding of life in general, being an adult. Just all the agony the Soul Eater rune causes Tur. And, this game does an excellent job of, at least in my opinion, portraying death, and portraying it as a tragedy. A lot of the times it's not a glorious thing. It's just sad. And this game does touch on some more serious issues when it comes to war and conflict. It touches on post-traumatic stress disorder, as we can see with Matthew and his reluctance to go back into the army based off of his past experiences. We also see, genocide in the game with the elves almost being virtually exterminated at the hands of Gwanda and the Burning Mirror. And then there's also, insinuated, at least intent to rape with, Craze going after LaPonte's wife or whatever, and hey, shit, at least you get to kill that motherfucker. I did for sure this time around. But no, like the game definitely deals with some very adult themes, and it, ties in very well to the, the overarching theme of war that this game does possess. And the tragedy that occurs, to a lot of these characters that do die, like Odessa, for example, it is accompanied by a very fitting, theme within the game that very much hits home the loss that is occurring on screen that you're witnessing. So no, they did a good job with the musical score when it came to those moments. And a scene that was particularly fucked up for me this time around, playing it as an adult particularly, is Gremio's death scene, where you're trapped on the other side of the wall and he's being eaten slowly by spores and he's talking to you while it's happening. That's some pretty dark shit, I gotta say. And when I was a kid, I didn't really know what spores were. I thought it was just like, something like, Venus flytraps were sprouting and slowly eating them alive. Not that spores is much better. So no, it definitely got to me this time around, and it is a memorable moment for a reason, especially when you're able to save him. After recruiting all 108 stars, and you're able to save at least one person from a tragic death. I really did enjoy that moment. But even with all the doom and gloom in this game, there was room for comedy. There was room for a bit of goofiness, which is essential, I think, in my opinion. I feel like a lot of series, for example, Final Fantasy, some of the later games, they lost their goofiness. They lost their sense of humor. And it makes them a little bit harder to play. You need that downtime sometimes in a game where a lot of serious things are going on. And Suikoden did this, we had the heist scene in the game, trying to steal LaPonte's sword so he come help us. There's like robot soldiers kicking around. And then we had to do that motherfucking wheel mini game. Oh my god, I got stuck on that thing for fucking, I think, 25 minutes just trying to get to the other goddamn end. And I know it does it for me every time I play the game, that I just take a ridiculously long amount of time getting to the other end of that fucking wheel. But that annoyance aside, there is room for humor in the Suikoden games, which I always enjoyed. Like another example would be, when you have the bandit tea and you're all drugged and almost killed. When Kryn tries to give you the bandit tea a second time, not knowing that you had already been poisoned by it once by another character. I thought that was, well done humor. It's something the gamer can appreciate, seeing these characters dawn on them like, oh, this guy's trying to fuck us over. So no, definitely love the humor that was in the game, and it definitely helped it overall. And this game, in terms of its music, it punches you right in the goddamn face. Even before you start the game proper and you just go through the introductory sequence where you're seeing flashes of characters, and you see Tur and Ted and Gremio go over the top of a cliff and they're looking at Lake Torrent Castle for the first time, and it hits that crescendo at that moment. Oh, it's so good. And if that wasn't a good enough way to start the game, as soon as you take command of Tur and you go to meet the Emperor, you get that kick-ass Imperial theme going on. Here, take another quick listen to this theme, and I've used it a lot in my videos. And speaking of the Empire, I always did like Barbarossa. I always liked his design, and playing this game again, he very much reminds me of Daniel Day-Lewis from Gangs of New York. If you've ever seen that movie, I can just imagine Barbarossa going through the War of Succession and just cutting down fools, looking like that. So it's another reason why I find that character a bit endearing. As much as I liked Barbarossa, the other villains in this game, like Wendy, for example, I never found her super compelling, really. But I did think that, the final moments of the game, after you beat Barbarossa, and he essentially, tells Wendy he threw it all away for her, and he picks her up, and he jumps off the jumps off the balcony of the gardens with her. I thought that was a pretty badass moment for the two of them. And like little trivia facts, they're both within the series canon, just technically missing. So oof, if they showed up at some point in a later Suikoden game, which we'll probably never get, oh, that'd be such a badass moment. And if the game's introduction and meeting Barbarossa weren't good enough, as soon as you get into Greatminster, you hear what I would debate to be one of the best, if not possibly the best, town theme in an RPG, the Golden City theme. So having said all that, Suikoden is a fantastic game. You know, it spawned one of the greatest and most beloved RPG series of all time, you know, and even though the game's not perfect, it is still very enjoyable to play today. And you know, it's not a super time-consuming game. You know, you could get all 108 recruits and accomplish most things within the game in 20 hours. Like it's very respectful of your time, absolutely. And while it is linear in design, it doesn't detract from the game at all. Like, in my opinion, not even one bit. It just makes it a tighter experience in general. So, you know, great game, absolutely worthy of anyone's collection. It's worthy of the franchise it built. You just gotta wonder, is the sequel any good?